and will be available. Now it's being recorded. I did say will be, so the conversation is now being recorded and will be available on Community Action's YouTube channel as well as the YWCA's YouTube channel. I think I've got that right. Parts of this event may be recorded and used by media outlets. And this month we're doing something a little different. Hopefully we'll continue it. We're going to identify a learning objective. And this month's learning objective is, how comfortable are you with sharing how much money you make? And can you start talking about how much you make with other people? See, I told you we would expect to be uncomfortable. So at the end of the program, the partner members will give announcements, and then at 7, we'll go to an unmoderated parking lot, and all other participants will be welcome to give announcements at that time. I need to say that DAT and YWCA of Rock County are nonpartisan, and that the Community Action of Rock and Walworth County is apolitical. And finally, we would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of Native nations. There are 11 federally recognized sovereign nations in Wisconsin. We acknowledge these indigenous communities who have stewarded the land through the generations and pay respect to their elders, both those past and those present. And with that, we're ready to begin. Here you go, Amy.
Thank you, Neil, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this weekend. As Neil said, we will be talking about pay equity for women of color. We have 2 really great video clips lined up for you. I will drop both of them in the chat before the end of the evening. The first video clip we're going to view is from a program called Maria, and it talks about the Latina Pay Equity Gap. So I think it's best if we just jump right into that clip, and then we have a couple additional pieces of information to provide a bit more understanding of the clip, and then we're going to open the discussion. All right.
Welcome to Maria. I'm Maria Cardona, and I'm here with my co-host, Maria Hinojosa, award-winning journalist and author. And we're so happy to welcome Monica Ramirez, activist, attorney, and founder of Justice for Migrant Women. Monica, thank you so much for being on Maria today.
Thank you for having me.
We want to talk to you about Latinas and pay equity. The statistics are mind-boggling. It's hard to imagine the wage gap is actually this large. When did you first discover this disparity, and what moved you to be vocal and speak up about it?
Well, I learned about the pay gap in my work, way back in 2003 with farm worker women. And really the way I came to learn about it was I realized that there were farm worker women in our country who were not being paid their own paycheck. Their pay for their wages was actually being paid to their husbands. And so that really kind of got me on this path of trying to learn more about the pay gap and ways in which women are being, unjustifiably denied wages. And so that really began the investigation. And then as I looked into it, I realized that it wasn't just farm worker women who are not being paid equally, it's Latinas across the board who are not being paid equally.
So we know about the Equal Pay Day, like we've been hearing about that in this country for a while. We hope that everybody knows about it. There's another thing, which is the Latina Equal Pay Day. And I have to say, when I heard about this, my jaw did drop, because considering how much work we do and what we do to kind of sustain the US economy, this number is shocking. So talk to us about what the Latina Equal Pay Day is.
So Latina Equal Pay Day is the day that we observe the fact that Latinas are currently being paid 54 cents to the dollar paid to white male workers. And for Latinas, that means that we have to work 23 months in order to earn what a white male worker is paid in just 1 year. So the day that the Latina Equal Pay Day is a day for us to talk about the fact that this gap exists, to call out the fact that it needs to change, and to talk about real solutions to addressing this problem.
So, Monica, wait a second, because my jaw is dropping now as well. And I know this, but when you think about it, so 23 months. So that means Latina Equal Pay Day is somewhere around November.
This year, we'll observe Latina Equal Pay Day on October 29th. And that means on October 29th, we will have caught up to what white male workers earned in 2019.
One of the things that I love about you, what you do, Tocaya, is that you're always talking about how this is not just a woman's issue, right? This is a family issue. This is a men's issue.
Right.
And when you think about the fact that if those of us who are living with men or who have families, it's not just us who are working, who are losing those dollars. It's the entire family unit.
Latina moms are actually paid 46 cents on average to that paid to a white male worker. And so Latinas, we are, we hold up our families, and when we're not paid what we should be paid for our work, that means we have less money to pay for rent, to pay for our kids' education. That means we have less money to pay for food and groceries and childcare. There's a reason that the Latino community experiences one of the largest wealth gaps in our nation, and this pay gap very much feeds into that wealth gap. Latinas have a much harder time saving for our families and for our future. When you're talking about this COVID-19 crisis, many of us did not have any kind of security blanket to be able to sustain us in this time of crisis, because we are so far behind. When you're thinking about it taking nearly 2 years to earn what a man earned in 1 year, I mean, it's incomprehensible. And I just want to throw one more data point out at you that I think will also shock you. So what this pay gap means for us as Latina workers is that over the course of our 40-year career, we will lose more than $1 million in pay. For some Latinas, it is even more. For Latinas who live in Washington, D.C., this is going to really blow your mind. But for Latinas who live in Washington, D.C., the loss of wages, of pay over their 40-year career is almost $2 million.
If we had that kind of money, for example, we would be investing, so right now, you know this, and I'm hoping people who are watching this show know it. Latinas are the most powerful consumer in the entire United States. Why is that? It's because we over-index in terms of African-American women and white women, in terms of deciding what's going to be bought for the family. You know this. Maria Cardona, you're buying for your whole family. You're making the decision about what books are being bought, what TV shows are being seen. When we used to go to the movies, what movies we were seeing, all of that, the detergent, the paper towel, all of that. And we are so brand loyal. You know that. I'm not going to mention any brands, but you're using the same brand that your mother used. And so the fact that we are such a powerful economic force in this country, and yet we're being stunted at the knees. In fact, that's what I'm saying. Imagine if we had more money, what more we would be doing to support the U.S. economy.
Well, exactly. And one of the things that I say is that Latinas are the fastest growing number of entrepreneurs in our country. So we are starting businesses faster than others, but unfortunately, many of our businesses are also closing down because we can't get the capital that we need to invest in our businesses to stay open. So imagine if Latinas were paid what we were supposed to be paid, how many businesses we would be able to open, how many jobs we would be able to create, and how much more we would be able to invest in our overall economy. And there's so much here. There's so much here. And one of the things that I think we have to also name is the fact that this pay gap is calculated based on full-time workers who work 40 hours in the course of a year. So there are many Latinas who the situation is far worse for in this moment, given the data. And among those are immigrant Latinas who earn on average of about 40 cents to the dollar paid to white men.
You also mentioned something that I think is critical. You talked about our immigrant women. What about undocumented women? What's going on there? Their situation is probably a lot worse, right?
Yeah, the difficulty is that the data only tells us so much. We don't know the full story. So when we disaggregate the data, we know that Central American women are amongst the lowest paid Latinas. But that doesn't tell us what the number would be for Indigenous women specifically. We don't know specifically what the pay gap is for Afro-Latinx women, for example. We know that for immigrant women that the calculation is between 37 cents and 47 cents on the dollar. And so what I have said in my work and in the movement to close the pay gap is that we also have to acknowledge the fact that while Latina Equal Pay Day is considered the last payday of the year that we observe, the reality is that there are women among us who will never catch up. There are women among us whose story we can't even tell. We can't tell the story of trans workers, for example, because we don't have good data.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if our 54 cents is a median and perhaps a best case scenario, we can only imagine that the gap is far wider for those who are even more marginalized.
That is tragic. Monica, we have much more to discuss with you, so please don't go away. Amigos, quédense ahí donde están. We're going to be back with more on Maria.
All right. So there is a lot to jump into just with that segment. And we chose to play that one first because we felt it did a really nice job of laying out for anyone that is not familiar with what a pay equity day is. And there's different disaggregations. Sometimes you'll see it represented for women or for moms, for Black women, white women, Asian women, Latinx, Native women, which we'll discuss tonight. But just to give you a sense of what this is. Now, how it's calculated is payroll information from the IRS coupled with census data. So there are limitations to the data. Think about households that aren't comfortable with completing the census for a number of reasons. And as they said, it's full-time employment. So think about someone who is underemployed, working part-time, their information is not calculated into the pay equity gap. Another thing to keep in mind, and I'll drop an article in the chat that's hopefully useful, is the more data we have, the more granular we can be with our disaggregation. So what does that mean? It's not apples to apples for every occupation imaginable. But what they do is take the average pay of a white male for one full year, and then the average pay for women, and then disaggregate it out by race. Now, where there is more data, let's say physicians, you have a good number of physicians across the spectrum of racial identification. So there's a better probability of being more accurate with what those pay wages are. And again, I'm going to drop an article in the chat that hopefully everyone will take a few minutes to read, and hopefully that'll do a really nice job of explaining pay equity, how it's calculated, etc. I am going to stop talking for a minute. Normal rules apply. Go ahead and put a question mark in the chat or put your question in the chat. If it's sensitive in nature at all, you can direct message me. We'll discuss the content without attaching a name to it. What were your first reactions from our first video?
For me, the wealth gap is what really struck me. $1 million over the life of a person is a lot of money in any case. And what could a person do with all that money? Not just spend it on themselves, but invest it in their community, etc.
When President Obama became early on when in his presidency, he signed a bill for, is it Lily somebody, that women should have equal pay.
Mhm.
But how come it's not happening? Who's supposed to be enforcing that?
That was, hi, Ruth, this is Angela Moore. That was the Lilly Ledbetter bill.
That's
And
right.
it was the first bill that President Obama signed into
Exactly.
law when he became president for pay equity. So that's a great question.
And it's not happening. Who's supposed to enforce it?
Yeah, I think it's, of course, it has to be the business community, but look at all the years that we have to catch up. The damage was done decades and decades and decades ago. So how do you catch up? In order to have pay equity, you have to start someplace and have some fairness. But how do you go back to help with that fairness?
I don't know.
I think what you're saying, Ruth, is let alone going back, let's make pay equity now
Exactly.
so that we can go forward.
Exactly. And again, my question, who is supposed to enforce that law? Is it our labor department? Who's supposed to enforce it? It's a law.
Janice, go ahead and jump right in. I see you waving your hand. Just, yep, unmute. You're still muted.
I'm not Mark Fuller. But to me, when I hear this kind of inequity in terms of wages and for people, it's like a form of modern slavery. You pay them enough to survive, barely, but then, unlike in slavery, you make them pay for their own expenses. So it's a way to do Jim Crow style stuff, and it doesn't look like it, but it is if you stop and think about it. When you're making 40%, and it would take you 2 years to make what a typical white male would make, that's slavery. Only we look free.
It says I'm Carrie Dre, but I'm Nancy Stabb.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I think with a lot of laws like this one, they're enforced when someone complains. And my guess is that a lot of these workers don't know that they have a legal right to this. If they even knew that, where would they go to get representation to help them navigate the process that they would have to do? Because I can assure you there will be barriers to it. And so I've never done it myself, but that's just the way these laws are set up. And so it's complicated. And what we need is more legal representation available to people who work in these low paid jobs, who feel that they are not being treated fairly. I think that would help.
The other thing is, how do people know that they're not getting paid as much? How does a woman know that she's not getting paid as much as a man? Seems like human resources should be the one that is watching that and making sure that everybody gets paid equally.
Not everybody has a human resource, works within a system that has human resource programming. If you think about people who like clean houses or do other kinds of labor that's unseen, there's nobody there to say you deserve more. The attitude is you're lucky you have a job.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet. That's true.
So Ruth, I did a little research while we were having a discussion, and it looks like the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or US EEOC, is tasked with enforcing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of
Okay.
2009. That's a mouthful.
Thank you, Amy.
Amy,
Yes.
there are actually two different aspects. There's pay equity or equal pay for equal work, which I think is what Lilly Ledbetter Act was getting at. But then there's also the minimum wage and people who work for less than minimum wage. And I think that is the larger issue that we haven't addressed.
Thank you for that, Judy. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight from the clip that we just viewed, which kind of made me tilt my head a little bit when I watched the clip the first time, was when she said that for some migrant workers, that the pay goes to their husband. That made me take pause. Can you imagine you are performing the task and doing the work and your pay goes to someone else? Maybe it'll get to you, maybe it won't get to you. What are our responses, if any, to that comment or any other comments from that first clip?
That's a 150-year-old attitude about husbands and wives, and the idea that if women actually were able to work in the 19th century, they weren't able to collect wages and keep them for themselves. It's just the whole notion that men run the family and women do the work and give the money to their husbands, and that's so outdated. I mean, outdated is a really bad word. It's worse than that. It's outrageous.
The thinking may be outdated, but according to this clip, it seems the practice may not be. But I hear you with your use of the term outrageous. I tend to agree. Was there anything that surprised you about the clip? Was everyone aware of pay equity days and how that's kind of disaggregated in a lot of different ways? I have a visual that Carrie put together. Thank you, Carrie. That I will share in a little bit as we continue the conversation. But I just want to save space. Was there anything that was new information to you or surprised you from the clip?
Amy, hi, I really am Jean Carfora. I guess what I had never thought about was the fact that so many Latina workers women are the ones who purchase more items for the household, that make those major decisions. You know, where I think with our white families, our white homemakers or households, the men and the children seem to have a lot more control over the dollars. But I was just really fascinated by the fact that here the women are the ones who purchase, who make those major decisions, but yet they're also the ones that are having to accept lower wages. So it doesn't make any sense to me that our economy doesn't want to increase the dollars for our Latina workers.
Well, unfortunately, throughout history, there are several instances where we as a country and as communities are willing to cut off our nose to spite our face. And this may be yet another example of that. So as I mentioned before, Carrie put together this great graphic. There we go. All right, so I'm a visual learner, so I like to have a graphic in front of me. And the pay equity day will change slightly from year to year. So it's not like Christmas is December 25th. It fluctuates some because again, we're using IRS data is being used, census data is being used, and they merged the two. So we are using white men as our basis. So what a white man on average will earn in one calendar year. So we place them right there at January 1st. Now, when you're thinking about the other groups of women, add a full year to this date, and then you get to their pay equity. So these were numbers taken from 2020 so that we could include everyone on the same calendar. So for AAPI, which is Asian American Pacific Island women, they have the smallest pay gap. So for 2020, that would have landed on February 11th. So 1 full year and then just under 6 weeks additionally before they earned what a white male worker earned the previous year, okay? We put white women in just for context. So the pay equity day for white women for 2020 was April 9th. So all of January, February, and March, and then a little past that first week in April. Then we jump down for Black women, pay equity is August 13th, and this was for 2020. This year, I believe our pay equity day was August 3rd, okay? And then Native American women coming up on Friday on October 1st. So just look at the visual of all of those months that need to pass before you reach parity of what white males earned the year before. And then for our Latinx sisters, for 2020, it was October 29th. And again, all of those women that we can't calculate pay equity for. So we want to be mindful of them as well. So I'm going to leave this graphic up for a little bit. I can't see everyone because I'm sharing my screen, but if you would like to chime in, oh yeah, someone put the graphic should be everywhere. I agree. So if you have comments or would like to provide commentary on this graphic before I remove it, just please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Is there any information about what % of Latinx women support their families entirely or mostly?
So I do have, oh, let me take the graphic down. And I'll go through some of the notes. And again, I'll drop the article where I pulled a lot of this from. So let's start at the beginning and we'll kind of work through. So you may be thinking for Asian American Pacific Islander women, well, it's not as bad. They on average make about 90 cents to the dollar for a white male. Again, they had the earliest pay equity date. But if you drill down into that number, so these are women living in the United States. For Nepalese women, they earn 50% of what a white man does. And actually Carrie did a graphic for this one too. So let me just share, I'll go to the next. So if you disaggregate the disaggregated data, for Malaysian American women, they actually earn 25 cents more than white men. For Hmong women, 61 cents. For Fijian women, 55 cents. And for Nepalese women, 50 cents. So it shows the limitations of aggregating the data for a big, diverse group. But on average, Asian American Pacific Islander women have the smallest pay equity gap compared to white men. But if you drill down on that number, there's another story there as well. So let me run through some of the notes. So the next after Asian American Pacific Islander women is Black women. So Black women on average earn 61.8 cents for every dollar a white man earns. And this ratio plummets to 50 cents if you segment out Black mothers. And then Black mothers are more likely than any other group to be the breadwinners. And by the definition of this article, that means that the person that is either the sole financial provider or contributes at least 40% to the household well-being financially. And the statistics here are that 74% are either the sole earner or contribute at least 40%. For Native American women, it has them down as 58% being the breadwinners, so sole provider or contributing at least 40%. And then one other note in the article, which I'm going to open the floor for others to share, and I'll drop that in the link, is that 49% of households with children, so let me say that again, 49% of households with children, so just under half, have breadwinners as mothers. And in this context, breadwinner is defined by either the sole provider or 40% contribution to the financial viability of the family. So I'm going to mute and grab that link for the article and put it in the chat in case anyone wants to follow up. But opening the floor for any additional comments you want to share before we move to our next clip, which is going to shift our conversation slightly.
One of the things that I struggled with when I first saw this data was that I'm pretty sure that we're not comparing apples and apples in terms of the jobs that are being performed. White men have higher paying jobs than Latinx women as a rule. And so that was a problem for me until I realized that the point is what people are making, not how we compare it. The point is how much Black or Latinx or Native American women are actually making, and how can they survive on what they're making.
Thank you for sharing that, Neil. And I just dropped that article, so hopefully that will be helpful. So next, we're going to shift the conversation slightly. So hopefully now everyone is feeling comfortable about what pay equity is. And now we're going to shift into what implications does that have for wage inequity and wealth inequity, and what do those gaps look like? So the next clip is about advancement, moving up, promotions in your job. What about the intersectionality of being a woman and being a woman of color? How are we able to navigate that? I am very excited to have Angela Moore on the call. So hopefully she will provide some insight, some experience, and how these things play a role in with her as she leads an organization. So this clip is a little lengthy. And in our planning committee, I said it's a little long. Should we use it? If yes, should we cut it? And there seemed to be a strong consensus in the group is that, yeah, it's a little long. It's just under 18 minutes, but it's really good. So grab a beverage, a snack. We're going to watch about an 18-minute clip, and then we're going to come back and have a robust discussion about it. It looks like there is one ad, and then we'll get into the video.
Your heart is at the heart of everything you do. And if you have heart failure, there's Entresto. Entresto
My whole life I've been a team player, so I was excited to be a part of something new and to learn. Unfortunately, I was not invested in the same way that my white employees were, but it's just kind of interesting to see how things played out and who got the most out of the summer. I can assure you it's not the Black people who spoke up about it. I can put it there. Just that. Black employment in America is in a state of crisis. According to Citi, failure to address racial gaps between Black and white Americans has cost the U.S. economy up to $16 trillion over the past 20 years. The Black wage gap alone accounts for $2.7 trillion of that. And while companies work to rectify these inequities, real-time data shows the gravity of the problem. Black women and Black men are paid 63 cents and 71 cents respectively for every dollar paid to white men. And research shows that over a 40-year career, Black women are slated to lose $964,000 due to the pay gap. The gap is even more severe for Native American women and Latinas, and the pay disparity only worsens as education level increases. Black female doctorate degree holders are slated to lose a staggering $1.9 million over a 40-year career. Take Ryan Walker-Hartshorn, a third-generation Stanford graduate with big dreams. Ryan first made headlines in June of 2020, but her story starts much earlier.
I was a collegiate athlete, had a career-ending injury, so didn't really have a plan. I was very interested in writing and media. And so, I really needed an entry-level job just to get some experience working.
Soon after, she found a dream opportunity to work as an assistant to Adam Rappaport, the editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit magazine.
I got what I felt was like a dream position for me, to be working at a large media company under like Vogue, Teen Vogue, Vanity Fair, New Yorker, just like seemed like endless possibilities for me.
While Ryan had her sights set on a future at Condé Nast, she also had to face an unsettling reality.
The first interview I went into, they brought me to the floor and I was just like, well, this is white, but cool. Nothing I've not seen. I went to Stanford and like all white schools my whole life. So I can handle this.
Ryan says her offer was roughly $35,000 a year with an opportunity to make up to $50,000 with overtime.
So that was a sell for me because I was like, hell yeah, I'm out of college. I'll make a lot of money in overtime and I'll be able to make ends meet. And like, that's what people do in New York City.
While Ryan's salary was low, she was still motivated by an opportunity to produce diverse content at an established brand. So in 2018, she pitched a story centered on Black-owned restaurants in her hometown of Oakland, California, for Bon Appetit series, Big Fat Weekend. The article did so well, she was asked to write another one, this time in Washington, D.C. Ryan says she received pushback for requesting pay for overtime hours on several occasions, including for the DC story.
And after all of that, my editor told me that she had never experienced that type of pushback or had to ever fight so hard for a budget. There's so many hours that we haven't filed because it was just like too much for us to go through.
Ryan also says she struggled to receive a promotion at Bon Appetit after nearly 3 years, while her two predecessors moved up in the brand after an average of 2.5 years on the job. Both former assistants are white. With a growing collection of writing samples, Ryan expected to follow their trajectory, but says she was lacking one important ingredient: support from her boss.
After my article had performed well, it was like, this is a great opportunity for me to bring it up to my boss about, taking on maybe more responsibility and storytelling. And then in this meeting with my boss, I was told that those contributions were like bare minimum and what was expected of me. And I wasn't doing anything extraordinary out of my job description and that basically no.
Ryan's struggle to move up within her company is not unique.
So I have not ever been promoted when I was in a company. I have held like senior recruiter, senior sourcer positions, not because I got promoted from already being in the job. That was because that specific company and recruiter reached out to me based on my background. I do know that a couple of my counterparts that were not reflective of my demographics specifically were promoted internally, whether they were there for shorter than I was or maybe a little bit longer, but they were promoted. And I was never, ever reached out to about potentially being evaluated for promotion.
According to McKinsey, Black employees are 23% less likely to feel like they have a lot of support at their company. Further, Black employees are 41% less likely to feel promotions are fair.
I think the reason why there is a challenge for underrepresented professionals to be promoted into higher positions, it goes back to the fact that they're not reflective at those leadership and managerial levels, especially within tech. Now, I can't speak for other industries specifically.
Today, Black professionals in the U.S. private sector make up 12% of the entry-level workforce and just 7% of the managerial workforce. When looking at the senior manager, VP, and SVP level, that number drops to 4 and 5%. At Fortune 500 firms specifically, less than 1% of CEOs are Black. In 2019, Harvard Business Review reported that managers promote employees they personally identify with, creating another ceiling for underrepresented employees of color.
Black workers on average are not being hired, promoted, or paid according to their level of productivity based on their experience or their education. Even if these discriminatory patterns are not quote unquote intentional, people's networks, the folks that you know, the schools that you go to recruit from, all factor into who gets an opportunity to be employed.
For employees like Ryan, the COVID-19 pandemic was the tipping point.
One of the things that we've heard about over a long period of time is that African Americans are the last hired and the first fired. And this is something that actually this year during the pandemic, we saw that initially a lot of African Americans lost their jobs. And then as the economy has been recovering slowly, that they have been getting their jobs at a later rate than others.
Ryan was able to keep her job at Bon Appetit when the pandemic hit, but she still found herself at a loss. While Condé Nast cut overtime hours across the company, Ryan says she was hit especially hard because of her low salary.
I was able to get a little bit to make ends meet, but then I started to get behind on my rent, actually. And then protesting happened. I think that really set me off.
Ryan started filing complaints about her boss as early as 2019. She even told HR about an incident where she says Rappaport asked her to make his coffee the color of Rihanna. But following the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, Ryan went public with her challenges, and she wasn't the only Bon Appetit employee to air her grievances. But things escalated when a racially insensitive photo of Rappaport and his wife was posted on Twitter by food writer Tammy Teclamariam. The 2004 photo was originally posted on Instagram by Rappaport's wife. It has since been deleted. On June 9th, one day after Teclamariam's tweet, Adam Rappaport, Bon Appetit's editor-in-chief of 10 years, stepped down.
I think all of that really enraged a lot of people, and it happened during the summer, which was very tumultuous for a lot of reasons. That's kind of, I think, what led to their stepping down. However, the events that followed really disappointed me.
Things did not get better for Ryan at Condé Nast. The company reportedly offered her an interim editorial assistant position in an effort to get her to stay. It wasn't enough. Ultimately, Ryan decided to quit in August of 2020, making her ineligible for unemployment.
I was very stressed that I had made the wrong decision, especially during a pandemic. But, you know, there's like a boundary or a limit And that boundary was reached for me, and I decided to make a decision about it. So now I'm living with that decision.
Ryan's negative experience is similar to that of many Black employees who feel forced out of the workplace.
And a number of surveys have found that people of color, African Americans in particular, and women find those environments to be incredibly hostile. So even when you have the credentials to do those jobs, often the environment is not conducive to one's mental health or productivity in those occupations.
Former Facebook recruiter Rhett Lindsay says he also struggled to find an inclusive culture at a majority white company.
When I was at Facebook, there was one meeting I had where we were focusing on diversity outreach. And I kid you not, they were playing a song and it had the N-word repeatedly playing over and over. It was uncensored. I found that to be the last straw for me in terms of the disconnect and the lack of awareness.
Following the George Floyd protests, large companies across the U.S. tried to rectify their shortcomings by setting diversity targets. In August of 2020, Condé Nast announced award-winning publishing executive Don Davis as the new editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit magazine.
I am very pleased to see that they hired a really incredible Black woman to run the magazine. However, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many Black people you hire. There's no actual support or infrastructure behind the diversity and inclusion initiatives at a corporate level within the company.
In a statement to CNBC Make It, a Bon Appetit spokesperson said, "With new leadership in place, a healthy and rewarding workplace culture built on inclusivity, respect, diversity, and equality continues to be our top priority." CNBC Make It reached out to Adam Rappaport, but he did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Facebook also tried to improve its diversity efforts by promoting Chief Diversity Officer Maxine Williams in the summer of 2020.
And it felt very convenient that it happened around the Black Lives Matter protests and the injustices that were happening in our society when this woman does an amazing job and she's been part of this organization for much longer.
Experts are wary about whether public displays of solidarity will actually lead to lasting change.
It's not enough just to put a black square on, your Instagram page. You have to do more. You actually have to take concrete steps, sustainable steps to actually create these pathways for people to experience upward mobility.
And inclusivity is often the missing piece to making those changes, with recruiters lacking awareness around hiring biases and practices at their firms.
There was several instances where whenever there's a hire made from a diverse talent, and a lot of times it was Black professionals, they would celebrate what they would call wins by popping champagne bottles, toasting, being the only Black male within my direct org. And I'm seeing my counterparts who are majority Caucasian celebrating and toasting. That's really strange to me. And it made me very uncomfortable. And it goes back to slavery of the competitiveness of bidding on a slave based on their skill sets and their attributes, their physical attributes. And whoever gets it, that owner is happy. And I'm not saying that that's the mindset of these companies. I know it's not, but that's what's reflective when you don't have the inclusion piece and someone like myself that doesn't feel included. That's what we think. That's what we visualize.
Ryan and Rhett's negative experiences as Black employees in primarily white workplaces are all too common. When things continue to go unchecked, federal agencies like the EEOC are meant to provide protection. In 2019, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission received nearly 24,000 race-related discrimination charges, making up 33% of charges filed that year. About 80% of those charges were filed by Black employees. But the EEOC has reportedly experienced severe cuts to their own resources and staff. Between 1980 and 2018, the EEOC staff numbers fell from 3,390 to 1,968. During that same time period, the US population grew by 44%, which might explain why the EEOC struggles to resolve most of the charges filed with the agency.
The percentage of ones where we said, we found cause to believe that there was discrimination, the percentage is not very high, basically is topped out around 20%. And that's because we get so many charges.
When Rhett left Facebook following a string of incidents, he used his recruiting experience to work towards a solution.
I was talking with my husband and I was like, I think I should look for another job. I think it's time for me to just, find another opportunity. And he said, no, because you're going to go to another company and it's going to be the same situation where you're not feeling the inclusion piece. And so I was really trying to strategize, what can I do to make sure that people of all shades, all demographics have the same opportunities?
Rhett's application See Me utilizes anonymity with the goal of eliminating bias in the hiring process. Candidate profiles will only display initials to protect against name bias, and photos will be hidden when employees are matched for a role. As a former recruiter, Rhett hopes his app will address company shortcomings when diversifying their talent.
I think the idea that it's a pipeline issue is absolutely incorrect. It's not a pipeline issue. The talent is out there. But here's where the problem falls. See, companies like to identify cultural fit. They not only are marketing that culture out, which automatically eliminates people to even want to engage and apply to that role or company. And then they're also evaluating who they are interviewing to make sure that they fit into this cultural fit idea that they've established. So it shouldn't be about cultural fit. It should be about cultural add, cultural bonus.
A Facebook spokesperson told Make It, we're focused on diversity and inclusivity, as well as advancing racial justice, both in our own workplace, as well as in how we recruit candidates to work here. Facebook denied allegations that they assessed for cultural fit during the interview process. The company did not address the song incident from the recruitment meeting or the celebratory champagne toast for diverse hires. In 2019, companies that were in the top quartile for ethnic diversity were 36% more likely to have above average profitability than those in the bottom quartile.
Across our society, it's important that we have a diversity of viewpoint and opinion and experience and knowledge so that we're really getting the best of our country and all that all communities have to offer.
As for Ryan, she is still struggling financially, but she has found opportunities to share her story with much larger audiences. In March of 2021, it was announced that Ryan would be assisting with an HBO Max show about a young group of assistants dismantling a toxic media corporation.
Right now I'm freelancing, writing, looking for jobs, just trying to figure out exactly what I want to do. I hope that more people speak up about their experiences. And I think the more people speak up about it, the stronger our voices will be collectively.
All right, so definitely a lot to take in from that clip. I am going to yield the floor. If you are interested in sharing, please go ahead and unmute.
Amy, thank you for sharing the clip. This is the first that I've had a chance to review it. So, I was really struck at the beginning when it was mentioned what Ryan's salary was, the $36,000 or $35,000 beginning salary with the potential to make $50,000. But it sounded to me as if they were categorizing her as an hourly employee, but as a salaried employee also. And that's the problem. She should have been listed as her hourly rate if she was truly an hourly employee and not a yearly rate. Thus, I think could have been the problem and the disconnect with her trying to get the additional pay that she was entitled to. the overtime. So there was some, to me, I was confused by that, but every employee doesn't know that in order to navigate that information. What also struck me was how, as African Americans and people of color and women climb the corporate ladder, it is even more stark. You don't see people like yourself the further up you go. So the support systems are literally non-existent, unfortunately. And I know that that clip sort of bear that to be true, how few there are at the top. And, you know, what is your support system, particularly internally? Some of us are fortunate to have external support systems, but you certainly need those internal support systems in order to survive. I will yield the floor and let someone else talk.
I'm going to jump in briefly because as you were talking, I kind of reflected on life experience. And it takes a certain personality to navigate these inequitable situations. I remember what seems like a lifetime ago when I was working at corporate headquarters for Bath and Body Works, and there weren't a lot of people that looked like me in the building, period. But I'm just the type of person, if there's not a lane, I'm going to create one. And I look back on some of the things that I did and I laugh. For example, I was in business school at The Ohio State University. And I remember I was working for Bath and Body Works, which is under the umbrella of limited brands. So there's like Victoria's Secret and Henry Bendel, White, the whole family of brands. And I remember going up to Mead Rudisill, who was our president at the time. And I said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the conversation verbatim, but I'm like, hey, I'm in business school at The Ohio State University, Fisher College of Business, and I will be graduating soon. So you and I should talk about my future. And he kind of took a step back and grinned. And he said, okay, set something up with my secretary. But my thinking was, well, what do I have to lose? The worst case scenario, he'll tell me, no, I don't have time or whatever. But yeah, not everyone is interested or able to do those things. And should it take that in order for you to get a fair shake at promotions or additional opportunities, etc. So what are some of your comments? What stood out in that video? Angela, that was an excellent point. It was like they wanted it both ways. Are you salaried? Are you hourly? If you're hourly, what's the struggle with getting the overtime? If you're salaried, that is a very low starting point, especially for New York City. I can't even imagine. But others, please feel free to unmute and join in.
I just wanted to say that watching the video myself, I kind of heard like what I struggled with the previous organization that I had worked with. I have faced the exact same things. I'm a Latina woman, and I was working at a company that was predominantly white, and a lot of the higher ups were white as well. And while I stuck around a lot longer than a few other folks, and I was invested in the company, and I wanted to grow and I wanted to learn. I worked in an assisted living, and while my background in education wasn't in that particular area, I was given different opportunities, or said that I was going to get opportunities to train and be able to move up the ladder and really kind of have a say in what was going on at my particular building. But the times when there were opportunities open and different trainings were offered, it just seemed like the rug kept getting pulled out from under me, that the opportunities that were open were suddenly closed, or if there was any opportunities like for open interviews, like my name wasn't even considered, even though it previously was said that, you know, next time we're hiring, we're going to have your hat in the ring. So, or your name in the ring. So I felt like that personally when that was getting talked about, because I've lived through that, and it really does stink.
It does. And Kimberly, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Ms. Sloan, you probably figured this was coming. I am directly calling on you because of your work with HR. Please unmute and share.
Well, Amy, no, I did not see it coming. But I too, have a lot of similar experiences in my line of work. And I think the ironic thing is that I was part of HR, but that didn't really have an impact on improving my life situation. As a matter of fact, it made it a little bit muckier because I knew the laws, I knew the rules, and yet none of those things applied to me, but I had to extend those benefits, if you will, to all the other employees, right, at the job. One of the things that I really related to was her, the young lady in the clip, her starting salary. And I remember one position that I was given, or almost forced into, actually, because I really didn't want it, but it was put to me like it was better for the college if I were to move into the administration building. And the position, as it was defined, was very similar to my colleagues across the state. And the varying difference was their salary. Mine was at least $35,000 to $40,000. There was a difference from when I first started. Therefore, it was going to take me a lot longer, right, to climb that salary ladder. But I remember having Miss Lily Ledbetter in Janesville at a women's group. And there were like over 300 people that came to that session. She was awesome. But she taught me a lot in terms of stamina and standing up for yourself as a female and then a Black female in a predominantly white organization. One of the things that I found out is on the back end of that, if you do have legitimate complaints, as the young woman did in the clip, the EEOC had lost so many staffers, had been drained of all of its financial resources. And so if you had the courage, because it takes a lot of courage, to stand up to an organization and to actually file a legitimate complaint, on the other end, you really weren't going to get the support that you should be getting legally, because most attorneys, in my opinion, felt like it was not frivolous, but almost a waste of your time to fight your case. And so not only did you not have the support in your own environment, you didn't have it on the legal side as well. And I thought that for me, that was probably the worst part of my experience. But I do remember that starting salary, that just kind of hit me right between the eyes. And it took me years and years and years while I watched other people get hired with less experience, less education than I, and they started out at $5,000, $10,000 more than I did. So it's still happening, and that's why the wage gap it's going to be with us for a while, because it's a tough issue. So that's my experience, dear. Thank you.
Thank you for being willing to unmute when I called on you. I appreciate that. I am dropping the link for the second video that we just watched in case anyone would like to share that out or watch it again. But are there other things that stood out, things that surprised you, things that resonated with you about that second clip?
I can't say it surprised me, but it did resonate with me. The fact that the EEOC has continually lost employees and funding all these years. And this, I think, is where those of us with some power and privilege can use that to try to affect public policy, because that's what it is. It's a policy issue. And I didn't know that. And that was new information. It didn't surprise me, but it was new information. And I think we need to hold our representatives accountable for the budgets they pass that cut funding for agencies like EEOC and others. That's not the only one that's lost employees over the year, that should be there to enforce fairness in the tax collection system. For example, the IRS, it's the same kind of thing. They don't have the people to go after the cheaters because they have been cut too. So that struck me as a policy issue, which is something I'm always interested in, and maybe something I could write a letter or do something about, or at least follow up by asking representatives about it.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Is there anyone else?
I'm thinking about all of these women wage earners that we're talking about, that I'm thinking specifically about this last one. Besides not getting the salary or comparable wages that other people might get, don't these people also lose out in benefits, including retirement benefits and long-term health care benefits and so on? So that's a whole nother level of loss that they take because they can't get up to the wage level of the others around them.
Certainly it affects the long-term benefits for women, particularly women of color. When I mentioned to Ruth about going back from that Lilly Ledbetter legislation, and Wanda, I had the privilege, thank you for bringing her to Rock County to see her twice. And yes, what a remarkable woman she was. And I was so proud that that was the first bit of legislation that President Obama signed. But if you are earning less over your entire career, then you will receive less Social Security earnings. That affects you and your family continuously. Retirement earnings, if you have the privilege to receive retirement, so many jobs, there are no retirement benefits or pension, but if you do receive those, they are less, unfortunately. And then if you need unemployment benefits or any of those other things, it is less. And it can also affect your credit rating. And all of this can affect your quality of life, how well you are able to position yourself to live at the present, but also in the future. So it is huge. It has lots of repercussions to you and your family and your life. It is not something that can be taken lightly.
Absolutely, Angela, and thank you for adding that. And just think about the practicality of what you bring home and what you're able to do with that. The groceries you're able to buy. How does that impact your health? The opportunities you're able to provide for your children. Can they get that tutor? Can they do that additional activity? Are you working additional hours because of your decreased pay? Does that mean that you have to also pay for childcare, or are children unattended? Or so think about not just the impact on the woman, but as Angela said, in the present and the future, but the entire impact of the family. Ms. Sloan, I see that you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I just thought about another impact, and today we seem to be paying a lot of attention to, our mental health. One of the things that is impacted totally when you're not receiving enough to live, but you're working and striving to make it, is your mental health. I do recall, and this was almost afterward, the stress that I was under. Because of some of the things that I was experiencing. And there's those environmental things while you're on the job. For instance, the differences of like the young lady, because she quit her job, right? Because she was stressed out. Then she lost the ability to file for unemployment. So my gosh, and like you said, Amy, I cannot imagine living in New York and not being able to know where my next paycheck was coming from or how I was going to make it. But environmentally, it was also mentioned that just because you hire 1, 2, 3, 4 persons of color, it doesn't really impact the environment in an organization. And I'm gonna just give you an example. Not only was I underpaid and overworked, but I also didn't receive the same resources as people that didn't, that were not my equal, if you will. They had an office, they had technical support, they had administrative support that they could rely on to do, you know, that day-to-day grind work of putting out papers and reports and reporting to the state. I had to do all of that myself. And that added to my stress, but I didn't realize it again until, you know, it's what's that old saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. It's kind of like that. So I just wanted to talk about the mental stress that puts on women in the environment, and they just continue to plug through what the situation is rather than quitting or, you know, whatever. So I just wanted to add that about our mental stress, our mental health.
No, I appreciate that. Absolutely an important point. So now we're going to talk about some of the myths as we transition around pay equity. So we have a graphic. All right. And I'm sure there are others. So I'm going to read through them. I'm not sure how you are viewing this, how small or large your screen is, and we'll tackle them one by one. So myth 1, women aren't negotiating well. That's why we're making less. Myth 2, when you control for education, there's no pay gap. That was actually addressed in that second video clip, but we'll come back around to that. Myth 3, women choose, and I love that it says choose, to work less or take time off. And myth 4, women choose low-paying careers. All right. So because I want to see as many of you as possible, I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to drop the myths as we discuss them in the chat. So you will be able to see them. So I want to be able to see your faces. So myth 1, women aren't negotiating well. Who would like to chime in on that?
I think there's a different expectation for women in terms of how they negotiate, whereas men are much more likely to feel free to be straightforward and say what they think because they've been raised to do that. And I'm thinking more especially of white men, where I think women and women of color and men of color have to be a little more careful about how they negotiate, and it comes across as perhaps weaker, and maybe that's a myth, but it's the way it seems to me.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I'm not sure where I read it, but it was statistics around who applies for what job. And more often than not, men are more likely to apply for jobs where they may not necessarily meet all of the required attributes, but women are far more unlikely to read requirements. And if they don't line up for each of them, they're much more likely to say, oh, well, this role might not be for me. And I think a big part of that, you're right, it may be ingrained in the way many of us are socialized, and what is considered bold and admirable in men may be viewed differently, those similar qualities in a woman or in a girl. And how does that carry over in the way we negotiate, but also once we're in the roles, the way we advocate for ourselves if things are not the way that we believe they should be, or the way we are seeing things turn out for others. So yes, but to place that on the women and say we are not good negotiators, I think negates a lot of the data that's widely available. All right, so we're going to move on to the second one.
I think it, Amy, I think it also tries to give some credence to a system that is stacked against us, and it tries to justify that system, which is very unhealthy. Very, very unhealthy. If more white males are at the head of this system that you are supposedly negotiating into and for, the whole thing is stacked against you. So to blame the woman that you're not a good negotiator in a foreign system or a systemic system like that is just not healthy at all.
I agree. And goes back to that mental health piece. Now you may be questioning yourself, oh, well, it's my fault. It's some deficiency that I had that I find myself in this situation. So let me make the best of it. All right, myth 2, when you control for education, there's no pay gap. And this was stated, just one example in that second video, is PhD holders and Black women compared to white men. I believe the number was over a 40-year career, close to $2 million in lost pay. And just compound that, because there's a difference in pay and wealth. And if you had that money, what could you do with it? What would you invest in? So there's that. But if anyone would like to add to that myth of when you control for education, there's no pay gap, feel free.
Well, more women are going to college these days, and also going after upper level degrees than men. So I don't know how that works out. I mean, women, the number of women has increased, and it's been increasing for the last, I'd say, 20 years. And the number of men is decreasing somewhat. But there, obviously, that's not true. There's a pay gap, huge pay gap.
Okay. My experience dates back a long time ago. When I changed jobs, I changed for a better pay raise. The male who was hired to replace me with less experience and the same education got about a 25% increase from what I had been being paid. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about knowing that, if you don't mind, and feel free not to respond? Would you prefer not to have known that, or are you somehow glad that you know that?
Oh, I'm glad that I know it. At the time, I was thinking it would be nice to go after a discrimination suit of some sort, but that really wasn't realistic.
Judy, thank you for sharing. Neil, please.
About education, this is tangential, but as you mentioned, or as Janet mentioned, there are more people trying to getting educated, and the statistics that I saw, and I think it was in the League of the American Association of University Women articles that I put in the chat box, that women of color end up with much higher student loans than white men. And considering how much they don't make, it takes them way longer to pay those loans back. That may or may not be related to this myth, but I just thought it was an important thing to say.
absolutely relevant to the myth that we're talking about, especially with higher education and the cost of higher education and how long does that cost last. So yes, very relevant. So we're going to move to myth 3. Women choose to work less or take time off. That resonated with me at the Levy household. We are fortunate to have 2 educated, wildly talented adults living under this roof. But when the rubber meets the road, especially with children, Sean makes way more money than I do, I will share. And if a child needs to be picked up or someone needs to take off to handle something else, that has traditionally in our household fallen on me. So I love that it says choose, which, yeah, I have chosen to work or to seek more flexible employment. But that's just for very practical reasons. He does not have the ability to do that, but the needs still exist. And I don't think I'm a unicorn. I think a lot of women choose to be in situations where they can provide assistance to other people in the family, whether that's your nuclear family, whether that's parents, whether that's both at the same time. So if that resonates with others, please feel free to unmute and to join into the discussion.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And part of the problem here is that as a society, we don't value the contribution of employees like you. You know, I think employers take advantage of the fact that you and many other women are willing to take less pay for some flexibility. That shouldn't reflect on the value of the contribution you make to your employer. It's also true that historically the professions that women choose to go into, and in that case, I think they do choose, have historically been underpaid, largely because women go into them, like education. It was dominated by women for a long time, and historically teachers have been underpaid for the level of education that they have. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing there. But part of it is we just don't value the contribution that a lot of people make. And that's on us as a society, not on you, but on us white people.
Amy, that resonates with me too, and on a different level, in that you're fortunate that you have, it's a 2-parent household, because if that's a single parent, has to have the flexibility and making less money, that's another challenge. So that's really something else to think about. And most women, a lot of women, I'll say, find themselves in the situation where they are the breadwinner and the sole parent. And I know there are men in that situation, similar situations, and the same issue will fall to them as well. So.
Absolutely. And I am so fortunate that I do feel valued in my role, and I love the work that I do. But just really, we're courageous conversations. I could not afford to do nonprofit work if my husband did not have the level of employment and income that he does. And so how do we structure this, and how do we fund nonprofits so that we aren't missing out on talent, or people have to choose, I really love this job, but I can't afford to do it.
I think there's always the issue of childcare and having insufficient childcare, and or not being able to afford childcare because women do make less. So that really leaves people strapped to who would rather not take time off of work, but have no other options.
Well, and it goes back to the society again. It's not only what you said, Nancy, about employees not being valued when they're women. it's about women being valued in our whole society, and where women are expected to be a part of everybody's life. And when that's the case, then you end up having to be more flexible because the whole society has pushed us that direction.
You know, that's a whole nother conversation, which possibly we can prepare and put that on the roster. So I am going to put myth 4, but I think we've already addressed that pretty well. Women choose low-paying careers. And Nancy, I think you put it beautifully. It's like a chicken and the egg. Did we choose low-paying careers, or are those careers low-paying because lots of women choose that field of work? Which, yes, that could be an entire topic on its own. We want to be respectful of your time, and we are at 6:57 p.m. I do have one announcement that I am so excited to share. And in sharing that, I'm going to share my screen. Many of you have heard the Racial Justice Conference. We are in our 7th year. Registration is open. Our keynote speakers have been announced. We will be rolling out our breakout speakers shortly, but our morning keynote speaker is Simon Balto. He is going to be talking about justice, and in his breakout session, the crisis of policing in the United States. Pardeep Kalika is going to be joining us for our afternoon session. Unfortunately, his father was one of the people that was killed in the Sikh temple murders that happened in Wisconsin. He will be talking about healing after tragedy, and specifically race-related tragedy. So we are so excited to have both of these gentlemen joining us as our morning and afternoon keynote speakers. Let me adjust this slightly. So this is our website, YWCA Rock County. I went to the What We're Doing and the Racial Justice page. You can click right here for tickets, and that will bring you to the page. Our early bird registration is $100. General registration, which is anytime after October 16th, leading up to the day of the conference, which is November 4th, is $125. So I just wanted to give everyone a visual of where you can find registration. You can always reach out to Georgine Hunt at our main office. If you want to purchase tickets by credit card over the phone, if you want to purchase a lot of tickets, which we encourage, and you would like to be invoiced for that, or if you would like to write a check for yourself or your organization, Georgine can definitely help you navigate that. I am going to yield the floor. We don't have a representative for Community Action online, but we do have Neil with Diversity Action Team. Neil, is there any updates or any announcements you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, Jean knows that I'm going to turn it over to her, but before that, you need to make another announcement, Amy, about Lunch and Learn, which is coming up soon.
Thank you for that reminder, Neil. I will drop the registration link. So this month's Lunch and Learn, we are so excited to have Rick Daniels joining us, and he's going to be talking about how we talk to each other about race. So while you are giving the floor to Dat, I will drop that link for registration. It will happen on October 7th, which is a Thursday, the noon hour from noon to 1. We will start on time, we will end on time, but I'm very excited to moderate that conversation with Rick.
So now I'm turning it over to Jean for the Diversity Action Team program for this next month.
Okay, we would like to invite you to the October 21st program, which will be virtual, and we'll have a guest speaker, Denise Jess, who is the executive director of disabilities for the blind and the hard of hearing. And she is outstanding. She's very involved with the disabilities within the state. So I think you'll find her very intriguing. She will be showing a video of the day in the life of a person with vision loss. And then also Richard Johnson will be sharing some of his experiences as a person with vision loss from birth on. So that's going to be a very interesting one. And Denise is very interested in transportation and voting rights. So it's something we all need to be learning more about. I also want to mention the Janesville Pride Festival, which is October 9th. And that's with the LGBTQ community within Rock County. And the hours are 11 to 7. And that'll be in the lower courthouse park. So we hope you can join us for that too.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you for allowing us to go a couple minutes over. The links for both the YWCA Rock County Fall Lunch and Learn and the DAT October event delving into disabilities are available in the chat. So please take a few moments to click on those and get yourselves registered and reach out to any of the representatives if you have additional questions. Neil, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you everyone for coming. Neil will be opening our parking lot, which is not recorded. So I'll get the recording stopped and unmoderated.